I can see like he was interested because he started bird dogging her like crazy. She was hopping all over the place and he was just right behind her. You could just tell it was that like trot that they do with their head down, and he's following her along.
My initial point was to go in like I did yesterday, and there was trucks there. So I had to change kind of my access point. So I got out of my car and I checked the wind, and it was pulling it down off the mountain. So I was able to go in below the clear cut that they were using, and littered with tracks and beds, and there was some urine I could tell was from a doe in heat. And so I said, well, I'm losing daylight. I found a good spot to sit where I could see out through the hardwoods and into that clear cut. And just before dark, I heard crashing coming down off the mountain. It was 2 does followed by him.
Wow.
And he came in grunting, and I threw myself forward to get around like a little sapling. And the does caught the movement, and they stopped. And the minute they stopped, he stopped. And I checked the head. I had no clue it was him until I got up to him.
Because you guys had pictures of him?
Yeah, for 4 years.
Yeah, so 3 years of that buck. And the cool part is to see, and the crazy part is it was only in one spot on one flat winning a 3-day period. That was like
on the opposite side of the brook that runs through there.
That's
so
something.
It's one of those things where, like, I had this theory in my head, like I think one time a year, maybe it happens multiple times a year, but I think one time a year a buck cruises his range.
Yep.
And he goes and sees what new bucks are in there, where some doe groups are, if things have changed. Because September, it was late September, he made an appearance on that one flat and then ghost.
Never again.
Wow.
Never would see him again. Never. And like I said, she mentioned before, we don't run a lot of cameras. There was one year I ran a lot of cameras, and I actually think it hurt me more than it helped me because I focused so hard. I had 13 different bucks on camera. Small, big, it didn't matter. But it was like, oh my God, this is the Mecca. There's tons of deer here. And then all of a sudden the rut hit.
They're gone.
Gone. And I hunted that spot really hard. And after that year, I said, I'll never do that again. I'm like, there is no way. I said, I will make sure I bounce, because all those deer, I mean, there was occasional deer you'd have come cruising through or whatever, but they were not hanging out there. So it was like, I'm just can't do that to myself again. That's spending way too much time in one spot. So, but it was, that was pretty intense phone call. That's for sure. I was actually coming out of the woods that night, and you guys know there's no service up there until you get back to a closer spot where service pops in. And
keep in mind, I'm also 5 months pregnant while this is going down. So when he listens to the voicemail,
she's about in tears,
he thinks
out
the
of
worst.
breath, and I'm like, oh my God, she's pregnant. What's going on? And the last three or four words I heard was, I just shot a huge buck or something. I'm like, oh my God, what is happening right now? So, and then it wasn't shortly after that, all of a sudden, ping, 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 my phone started popping up and the pictures of that deer, and I'm like, I don't know if she realizes it yet, but I know exactly what deer that is. I'm like, I can't believe it. I said, he is finally dead. I'm like, I can't believe she just killed him. Like, so you guys, I haven't actually had you guys go up there, but when we brought him to the taxidermist, that taxidermist called me and he goes, have you really checked this deer out? And we were like, yeah, we looked at him. He's pretty scarred up. He goes, no, I don't think I have ever seen a deer this scarred up. I mean, his eyes had holes in them. He's got a giant scab on the back of his neck. And he was like, you know, there's only so much I can hide. And she was like, don't hide any of it. No. I want it all to be there. That's him. That's his character.
He had to make eyelids on one of the eyes.
Yeah.
Just to get it.
Because he was that tore up.
Yeah.
Wow.
One was full of scars. So
He's a fighter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Big time.
That's cool. He's a wicked buck. What did he weigh?
164.
164. Yep.
That was a pretty intense week.
And then you got your big buck in Maine. Do you want to kind of tell that story?
Yeah, so I left for Maine.
How about talk about your whole family last year? 'Cause it was
Yeah.
pretty
So-
incredible.
Yep.
Normally how it works for us is first weekend, I normally hunt with her. It's our time we spend. We get to hunt together. And then, of course, she had a rifle tag last year, so that kind of worked out good for us.
That ain't happening this year. Sorry.
As the week went on, of course, both of us have to work the first week, so neither of us got to hunt. So normally when the second week comes up, I hunt Saturday with her, and then half a day on Sunday. Sometimes she goes, sometimes she decides not to go because it's only half a day I can go. Well, I jump in the rig and start headed for Maine, and I'm like 2 or 3 hours into the trip, and she sends me a text message, and her dad shot a buck. So I was like, oh, that's awesome. That's a pretty cool start to the week.
Yep.
So we're up there. First day goes by. Monday evening is when we just had that conversation. I get the voicemail, and all of a sudden she shoots a big buck. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Jesus, Sam shoots a buck or Dad shoots a buck. I'm like, this is pretty cool.
My
Well,
uncle
Wednesday
had already got one.
Yeah.
Had already shot his.
Wednesday rolls around. I forgot about that. Your uncle got one too. During bow season.
Yep.
So Wednesday rolls around. She calls me up, and I'm at the camp by myself. It's dark at this point, and she is ecstatic. Her mom killed her first buck in over 50 years of hunting. And her mom had been threatening the last couple years, like, this is my last year if I don't. And she refused to shoot a doe. She goes, I want my first deer to be a buck. So she ended up killing that first buck.
7-pointer.
I no more than hang up the phone. 10 minutes later, my dad calls, and he's like, I just shot a huge buck. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I was like, all right, don't pull my leg. He go, I'm not. And at that point in his voice, I could hear it. I'm like, are you? I'm like, where is it? He goes, I just sent you pictures. Blah, blah, blah. He's going. I couldn't even understand him. He was talking so fast. He was like one of those jumping jelly beans. And I'm like, what is going on? And the picture popped through, and it was that buck. And I'm like, what? And that was
nice big buck.
Yeah, that was his first buck in 45 years. And I'm like,
dandy.
Man, I was like, this is just crazy, crazy stuff that happens. So Thursday comes, and I had a complete meltdown while I was up there. We were getting like the perfect little dustings of snow every day. It was washing out the old tracks. It was just, you couldn't ask for better conditions. And time, if I was to pick out one thing, probably that's equal or as much that I beat myself up on more than the whole bad shot thing, is time.
Yep.
Because I always feel like I only have so much time to get something done, especially like Vermont's only a 16-day season. Maine and New Hampshire run for 5 weeks straight between their muzzleloader and rifle. So it's like, I feel like I'm always so stricken on time, and I got to push. So I'm fairly new to the tracking game, and I was just trying to go so hard and so fast. And I would come into a barnyard, and I would just confuse myself because I'm just trying to go and go and go. And I'm like, I need to get out of this barnyard. I need to make time up on this deer. So I finally had a complete meltdown. And like I told you guys, I walked onto the biggest track of my life, and I walked over the top of it because I was so frustrated that day, because it went right back down to a spot I just came out of that was just loaded with tracks. And I'm like, I'll never be able to sort them out in there. So I'm on my way back to camp, and it's a long drive back to camp up there. And I finally said to myself, I'm like, all right, you just got to calm down, slow down, be methodical, pay attention to the details, and really just be intimate with the track. Figure it out. It's like a puzzle. You got to just figure it out. So Friday comes along, and I ended up tracking a deer, and I jumped it out, and I saw that deer. So I'm like, perfect. That was much better. Like I went through a barnyard. I picked that deer out. I just wanted to follow a deer to see if I could catch up to it. I'm pretty sure it was either a small buck or a doe. It never really left any peace signs to tell me the difference. So I was like, needless to say, Friday ended, Saturday comes. And most of the time when I'm up in Maine, Of course, you can't hunt on Sundays in Maine. Saturday was the last day. I only get so much time to hunt. So I'm like, I can hunt Sundays in Vermont. I'm going to try to go back if I can. Well, that morning I had made a plan that if I didn't see a track by 11 o'clock, I'd take the drive and go back to the camp. Well, I had gone into one spot and there was a bunch of tire marks up on this one road. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go check out a different spot. And I'm like, it's only across the river. I'm like, it really can't be that different. So I go into this other spot and I'm driving down the road and I ended up meeting a Mainer up there, super awesome guy. And he was sitting there and I'm like, I drive by him, he waved. And I'm like, driving down the road and all of a sudden I pull up and I'm like, oh my God, that's a big buck track right there. Like looking at it and I'm like, what do I do? Sitting there in the truck and I'm getting mad and I'm like, I got to back up. And ask that guy. So I backed up. Him and I had a conversation for a little while there. And he's like, no. He goes, I shot a buck the other day. He says, I was just out. He says, I usually stay up here for most of the season. He goes, I'm just out and about. So he said, go ahead. You want to take that track? Go for it. I said, man, are you sure? I was like, if you got somebody in here, I don't want to screw anybody up. And he goes, nope, go for it. So I drove down. I parked, got out of the truck, and the buck had come out of the thick side of the road and was headed across into like some clear cuts. Mm-hmm. But he got into the road and I must have drove over this part and missed it, but he got into the road and he kind of walked up the road again and he went back onto the side he came out of. And I don't know if it was just a timing thing or if he had been following her, but there was a doe there and she kind of bounded back. Now, this is going to be a long story. I'm a super detailed person. Mm-hmm. Like I try to pay attention to every little thing when I really put my mind to it. So she bounded off, he lost interest, and then just took a 90 and went right across the road. And as soon as he got into that clear cut, he just started lining. He went probably 300-400 yards into that clear cut, and he comes into a bunch of doe tracks, and there's beds, and he made a scrape. And there was just tracks everywhere. And I'm like, all right, I'm not even going to waste my time. I'm going to back up to past that scrape, and I'm just going to cut to my left, and I'm going to make a big loop and see if I can figure out where he came out of this mess. So I started going around, found a couple doe beds in there, and immediately right then I'm like, I'm going to start gaining time on this buck. If I think what he's doing, I mean, he was just doe crazy. I finished out the circle, got about 3/4 of the way around. I found his track coming out, and I'm like, I'm positive that's his track. But I'm going to finish the circle just to investigate. Finish the circle. Sure enough, that was him. Run back, get on it. He starts headed up through the clear cut. He goes probably another 250, 300 yards. And I come to this bed, and it's big, like way bigger than the other ones. But it's not giant. Like, it's not one of those beds where you can look at it and be like, oh, my God, that's a 200-pound buck. It was just super small, but thick.
Wicked
like,
wide.
Super thick. And I'm like, this is a good buck regardless. I'm like, I'm going to stay. So I stayed on his track. I went through the bed. Had I looked to the left, hindsight, I think I would have figured it out quicker, because what I think had happened was the bed that he had made was actually him coming back, and he laid down in his backtrack after he went and made a small circle.
Right. And
what he did was he went up through, kind of cut off to the right, and he went and he skirted the edge of this clear cut because there was a bunch of spruces up there, and there was like 3 or 4 doe beds in there. Well, 2 of them must have been fresh because he bumped doe out of them, and they must not have been ready because he just kept right on that circle, comes around, and he literally, I'm looking back down, and I'm like, oh, that was his track. That was his track going off to the left. I should have looked. But sure enough, I come back down to that bed. It was him. And at that point, I think is when he laid down. After he made that little circle, he laid down. And I look off to my right now because I'm looking back down his backtrack, and I can see 2 fresh rubs, and they were green. And I'm like, that just happened like maybe an hour or so ago. So I go up and I'm checking them out. And at that point, I'm looking at the rubs, and I can kind of see where his antlers hit it. They were kind of half-hearted. And I was like, okay, I'm peeled off, started following his tracks. He gets to the back of the clear cut, and he meets up with another doe. And immediately I can see like he was interested because he started bird dogging her like crazy. She was hopping all over the place, and he was just right behind her. You could just tell it was that like trot that they do with their head down, and he's following her along. And I think 2 doe had come through before her, and she was trying to catch up to them. And then he came behind her and caught, and this is the way I was playing it out in my mind. If that's exactly what was happening, I'm not positive, but I'm following them up through, and they've got those slash cuts. It's like those lanes that they cut down through the woods. And I follow them up into this lane, and all of a sudden, we had talked about this earlier. At this point, I didn't know how wide the buck was. I knew he had a decent rack, and he had a big hoof on him.
Yep.
And I'm walking up through, and that doe turns off to the left and goes through the 6 like cedars. There's like cedar lanes. She plows through it. He goes in right behind her, and it's thick. Like I'm going through sideways. I'm ducking under branches, and I get to the edge of it, and I poke the gun barrel out, and I like just barely stick my head out to where I can see up and down both ways. And I had a feeling with as much as he was messing with her that I was gaining time on him, because he really wasn't going fast. He wasn't striding out there. He was just kind of taking his time. And she boogered off to the left, and he turned to the right once he got into that lane. So I don't know if she had gone ahead of him and had run out into that thick stuff and popped back out, and he either saw her or smelt her. But when he went to the right, he had started following those other 2 deer tracks. Well, she popped back out in front of him, and he was bird dogging her again. Well, this lane's probably 300 yards long. He's following her up the lane, and I can look ahead, and in the lane, there is a deadfall cedar down. And it's above my hip height. I'm 5'9", so I figured it to be pretty close to like 3.5 feet in the air. I get up to that tree, and all of a sudden I can see where the doe stopped, and she ducked under it and went. And I can literally see in the snow where he went up to that tree, and he smelt her tracks, and he backed up to go around it. Right then, I was like, the wheel started turning, because I'm like, there is more than enough space for a buck to have dipped under there if he was that intent about doing it. Well, he backs up and he goes around the edge of that tree, and he's following those other 2 deer tracks. And I happen to come around the tree, and I look off to my left, and right there are these 2 beech shoots. And this is how he kind of, I'm not big on the naming deer, but this was kind of what came to my mind. But you know how when somebody plows up your driveway and after that first wet snow, and you get that like sod that rolls up? He took these 2 beech shoots and all that snow, and there was just moss and dirt 3 foot wide on both sides of those beech shoots. And I mean, he just had it all tore up, and I'm like, holy, he spent some time right here. I'm like, okay.
Yep.
And at that point, I'm seriously not trying to steal anything out of Rick Labby's book. I looked up into the sky, and I'm like, Pop, I need your help. Help me see this track through. I think this is a good buck. Just help me see this one through. So I turn and I look. The doe he had been following, the smaller one, she went straight out from those rubs. Like she just plowed through that stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I'll follow in the tracks up with my eyes, and I can see where the other 2 doe went up, and they just kind of casually turned in. This is when I was like, okay, they're further ahead. He's more concerned with the other doe. This is the second time the wheels really started cranking on how big the rack was on this deer, because all of a sudden he turns and he's walking up the edge of that cedar, and you could tell like he was trying to find a spot to go in there, but it was just a wall of cedars.
Yep.
He walked probably 20 to 30 yards past those last doe tracks, and he was like, nope, I'm headed. And he just plowed through this stuff. It was thick enough that I literally had to get down on my hands and knees, and I army crawled through it. And it was probably 8 to 12 feet that I had to go through. And I'm kind of like trying to stay, because I'm like, man, I feel like I'm getting close, and I'm trying to stay to where I can get the gun barrel through the trees if I have to. And I pop up, and all of a sudden I'm in this little tiny open spot. I mean, it's like 10 by 12 spot with just little poles. And there was deer tracks everywhere. Like, I mean, I'm like, oh man, it is thick in here, and I got to try to sort this out. So it took me a second, and this will kind of get more to the hindsight of what happens after everything. But of course, you're walking through there and you're weaving through all that stuff. So you're ticking branches and you're kind of like, you're making noise. And I finally had kind of figured out that I thought the other two doe had gone in there and they had turned and gone to the right, like they were going to continue on that lane, but through the thick stuff. Well, that other doe, she got in there and she just blasted out of there to the left again. And I found where I thought his tracks went up through there. And there was this little blowdown. And I stepped up over the blowdown and there was like a little land rise, probably like 2-3 foot tall. And I got up and I'm standing on top of that land rise and I'm looking down and I'm trying to follow the tracks with my eyes. And I'm like, all right, I can't see 7 yards in front of me. I got to try to follow it with the best and try to pick my path through here. I've already made a bunch of noise. I lift my foot off the ground and I hear, and I'm like, immediate, like hair on the back of my neck. I'm like, that was close. I look up and I'm scanning through the thick cedars and 10 yards in front of me, I see legs coming at me. And I'm like, okay, focus. I'm like, I started getting the gun up. And as I almost get the gun to my shoulder and he stops. And I'm like, well, I think that's the buck. I mean, that's right where that grunt, because at first when he grunted, I kind of was like looking around a little bit like, was that a tree or was that really what I heard? But when you hear a grunt, it's really hard to not distinguish it. It's pretty obvious, at least for me. Because I've heard, that is one thing. I've heard a lot of bucks grunt over the years. And all of a sudden, he moved again, and I just flung the gun up. I flicked the safety off, and his head, he grunted just before he dipped, and all of a sudden, he dipped into an opening like 7 yards away, and I just see these massive beams coming off his head. I pulled into the first opening I saw. As soon as his shoulder came into it, boom! Of course, all I can think of is Larry Benoit's first hunt on his first video ever, when he shoots, and it just sounds like... because it's so thick and there's so much snow. Yeah. That's exactly what it sounded like. There was no rapport. It was just, poof. I hit the deer. I can see him buck up. He blows out of this cedar and he's running right at me. He comes up and he stops 3 yards from me, and not even thinking about it, I subconsciously must have just done it. But I remember now, thinking back, I remember hearing the brass tink off the tree when I slammed the next shell in.
Yep.
And he's standing there 3 yards from me in the open. And I just remember him lifting his head up and his eyes spotted me. And it was like that, F word.
Yep.
Like his eyes went from being squinty to that big. And I just put it on his chest, pulled the trigger again. And when it hit him that time, he just dropped to the ground and he snowplowed. I could have kicked him when he slid by me. And he died 5 feet to my left.
Wow.
And it was
pretty exciting.
One of those things where you just stop and you're standing there for a second. You're like,
oh my God.
Did that just happen?
That's
Holy.
crazy.
It just one of those, like, probably never, ever happen again in my life. But to be that close, I hope it does.
It will.
That was
super,
super intense.
You keep tracking it. It will.
It was definitely, that was probably one of the highlights. It was the highlight of my deer hunting career so far.
And it was a giant.
Yeah.
It was a nice buck.
Yeah, old buck. Big character on him. He had 9 points. I don't know if you'd actually call his main beam point a drop time, but it kind of comes out. It points down toward the ground. Yep. And he's got a little drop time that he broke off, but he's just super wide and heavy. I think somebody measured him at 22 1/4 inches wide, but just a super old buck. Cool.
No, he's a wicked cool buck. I know that when you got him and you posted pictures of him on Facebook, I was like, man, that's an ancient buck.
Yeah.
And you had him aged.
Yeah. Yeah. 10 and a half. Came back from the deerage.com.
That is sweet.
Yeah. It was just a fun day. Like, you take a little bit of time and you really take in the moment, because that was actually at that time the first buck I had ever killed tracking. So that slow down, like, you hear guys like push.
Yep.
You got to find your pace and go with it.
Yeah.
Because you want to catch up to them, but at that same time, if you're missing little details, it could be that little detail that in the end, that's why you blow them out. Or
it's the difference maker. And what's funny too about tracking is all your ducks need to line up in a row. Like, if you would have looked to the left when you came to that bed and noticed that was his tracks coming back or whatever, and you didn't go on his little loop, then you wouldn't have caught him at 7 yards in the spruce or in the cedars. You know what I mean? Like, it's all those little things that you did. Like, there was a million different possibilities of what you could have done on that track, but you did the right ones.
Yeah. Well, and it's
because he's at the taxidermist.
It's like Sam and I talked about with her buck that she just got with her bow. It was not a great shot, but the shot killed the deer.
Mm-hmm.
I truly believe, and I have always said this, I really do think that when things are meant to happen, that it's meant to be. That deer was meant to be hers. That deer was meant to be mine. It was just meant to all unfold that way. And that's exactly how I took that hunt. I was like, what happens if I had done this different?
Yeah,
and then I started doing the role playing in my head, like, what made him come back? Was it me making the noise in the brush? Did he think I was the doe, or did he think I was another buck coming in trying to take his doe?
Very good possibility.
You're just like all those things. That's what makes tracking so exciting to me. Is every hunt is a different journey. It's just they unfold differently each time. So, but yeah, it was pretty crazy. That deer over there, that one had a pretty crazy story too.
Your bow kill?
Yeah.
Hey, you want to go? You want to hit on that?
Yeah. So
that's a beautiful bow buck for Vermont.
Yeah, that was
a beauty.
So no history with that deer. That's just So I've hunted this spot for a couple years, and kind of you start getting things figured out a little bit. Well, at that time Sam had just moved down here, so there was one camera that I was running for her to kind of more keep her motivated to, like, hey, you got to go in there and sit. Those deer are definitely using that area. Well, at that time, our relationship was pretty new. She was working 2 jobs. We were trying to make sure we afforded rent and groceries and all that stuff. So she had to go to work that night. And I got out of work, and I got actually out of work late. And I'm like, man, I got to find a spot to go. And this spot popped in my mind. And the only thing I could think of was all the deer that she had been getting on that camera had been coming in super late. And I'm like, if they're coming super late, I'm just going to put my head down and I am going to mog as high up the mountain as I can go, get to where I think a good pinch or funnel area is going to be, and just see if maybe I'm catching those deer staging up or coming down. So
I just would like to add, when he says mog down, you ain't going to keep up with him, because his normal pace is a sprint.
I get yelled at a lot by a lot of guys.
He turns around, he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, why are we running?
Yeah, my nickname's the Mountain Goat, because I just, I'm a lot like you are when that comes to that. Like, if I could look at the steepest, if I think there's a big buck up there, it ain't going to stop me trying to go up there and find him.
Right.
It won't. I've fallen many of times. I actually pushed a boulder down the mountain after falling.
Yeah, we've had some interesting hunts together. With the snap around, like, why'd you do that? Well, I didn't know the boulder was going to roll down the hill.
I mean, honestly, a boulder. Why would me putting my feet on it make it roll down the hill?
At that point, you just learn to laugh, because it's just funny. Like, it wasn't like she did it intentionally, but it's.
I was like, I'm pretty sure if there were deer here, they're not anymore.
They're not anymore. Yeah.
So
that's funny.
So I get about halfway up, and I stop, and I'm like, God, is this the right plan? You're always like second guessing yourself. And I'm so I stand there for about 5 minutes, and I'm like trying to figure out the wind, and I'm trying to like go through the scenarios in my head. And I'm like, nope, go with your gut feeling. Mm-hmm. Just go. And I mean, I get up there, I'm drenched in sweat, and I'm like, I'm never going to see a deer tonight. There's no way. I mean, the thermals are still pulling up the mountain. I'm like, there's just no way. All those deer are coming down. They probably smelt me long before now. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, I'm up here. I'm just going to find a place. So I get up in the tree, and this is on the national forest. So, I'm up in this tree, and I'm looking out, and people don't realize when you hunt on steep mountains, you don't just go 12, 16 feet in a tree. You got to get way up there, because if you don't, those deer, when they're coming down, they're looking right at you. So I get way up in there, and all of a sudden the wind starts doing this swirling part. Well, as I'm sitting there and light's starting to fade, I'm like, what do I got to lose? I already made a ton of noise. I probably smell. I'm like, I'm just going to try grunting while I'm up here. So there's probably like 45 minutes left. And I grunt a couple times. I wait a couple minutes. I grunt a couple more times. And as I'm sitting there, I thought I could hear something, but I wasn't sure. So I have this weird thing. When I'm in a tree stand, especially, or eat anything, if I'm hunting on the ground, when it starts getting later in the night and the temperature starts to drop, if nothing's going on, I'll stand up or I'll sit there and I'll draw my bow back just to see, like, okay, mental note, it was hard to pull back. Like, just keep that in mind for if a deer comes in. You got to make sure the right situation. So I get up and there's like an old, I don't even know what you'd call, where the old bulldozers used to bulldoze the roads up in the mountains. And there was a white piece of birch bark. And I can just remember I stood up and I drew back and I pulled down on that. And all of a sudden I hear snap. And I'm like, what? I drop the bow down like that, and I look over my left shoulder, and here he is coming down, and I mean on a steady pace, and he's 30 yards from me. I'm like, how did that deer get that close? And I didn't see him or hear him, and he is just coming. Well, at this point, I'm turned completely the opposite way, and I'm left-handed. So I start scooching around the tree, and I mean like gremlin steps. I'm like going around the tree. I get about halfway around, and all of a sudden my boot goes, eat. I'm like, oh, and he did. Slammed his legs into the ground. He looks right up in the tree at me, and I'm like, I'm silhouetted. This buck's gone. He's looking at me, lays his ears back, puts his head back down. He starts walking, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So I start turning more, and all of a sudden he gets probably 10 yards from me, slams him on again, and he looks up at me in the tree, and I'm like, now he's definitely gone. Kind of looks up at me, puts his head back down, sniffs out in front of him a little bit, looks back up at me, and he takes like 2 more steps, and I just ripped the bow back, and I swung just as he did that. Well, that movement stopped him again, and it couldn't have been any better. He locks him up, takes 1 step back with his left foot, and he curls his head back behind a beech tree, and he's looking up at me, and I'm like, I'm aiming dead center of that pocket. I had no idea what he was. I just know I saw points, and I could see it, and I'm like, I just picked the crease, I let the arrow go, and I heard the thwop, and I'm like, that sounded good. It just had that like pop sound, and I'm like, usually that's in the diaphragm somewhere close. So I'm sitting in the tree, and it gets dark, and I'm like, okay, I got to get down and check my arrow. So I get down and I check the arrow, and I'm like, oh. Guts and dark red blood. And I'm like, I got to get out of here. I got to just leave this deer be. I got to get out of here. So I head back out. I head down, practically run back to the truck. And I'm like, I'm just going to give him a bunch of time. Texted a bunch of my buddies, texted them the blood, just kind of getting everybody's feeling on what I should do. And depending on, doesn't seem recently, but in years past, it's nothing to sit. It would have been nothing to sit in that tree and hear coyotes down the ridge or up the ridge. So I was like getting pretty bent out of shape about that. Cause I'm like, man, that was definitely a good buck. I don't want to lose it to coyotes. Right. So I finally got a hold of the guy that I used to go to the camp with. And he's like, well, what do you think? And I'm like, I don't know. I said, I don't feel comfortable leaving him. I'm like, cause I just have a really weird feeling that he will not be there in the morning. Either they're going to push him off themselves or he's going to be gone. So we get there, hike all the way back up in there, get on the blood, and I can look, and it is so steep at where he went down through, I could pretty much follow, without even having to follow blood, his bound marks. Well, he gets down to the next shelf and he stops. And this is an awesome experience to be able to use in like my hunter education classes that I do, because it's one of those really key things about giving deer time when you're especially on certain shots. So we're following the blood down, and we get to the next flat, and you can see where he stopped and he went to a walk. And then I could see like the spots of blood, and I'm following it with the flashlight, and all of a sudden I lift up, and I'm like, oh boy. I said, hey, are those eyeballs right there? And he goes, oh yeah. I said, man, I'm pretty sure that's him, because if that was a deer about its wits, I said that deer would be gone by now. Yeah. And I put the flashlight back down, and I'm like, of course, no bow, nothing. Just knives in case we had to dress him out and stuff. And we're sitting there, and I pick the flashlight back up, and he's looking at us, and he turned away. And I'm like, hey, he's sick. I'm like, he's hurting. So we backed out, walked way up on the ridge again. We sat down and just waited there. And I'm like, it was the gentleman's idea. He's like, I got nothing better to do. What are you doing tomorrow? I said, well, I guess I'm calling into work. I said, I'm not just going to leave. He's like, well, let's just hang out here. He's like, what do we got to lose? Mm-hmm. So we sat for about an hour. All of a sudden I heard something, and I'm like, man, I said, I'm pretty sure he just got up and moved. He says, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure. So we get up, we walk back down there, get to that point, take the flashlight, and I look up, and I'm like, oh, I said, he's gone. He's like, what do you mean? I said, he's not there anymore. So I take 2 more steps, and I look, and all of a sudden I can see, like, he turns his head like that, and I can see the eyeball. I said, oh, okay. What he had done is he had got up and repositioned himself, and he had kind of slid around the tree that he was at. And I'm like, okay. So we backed out again. We went, sat for another hour. We're sitting there, and it's starting to drizzle rain, and I hear a noise again, and I'm like, that was louder than the first time. I said, I'm pretty sure he got up, and he either went somewhere or, he did something. And he goes, are you sure? And I said, yeah, because he can't hear very good. And he's like, are you positive? And I said, yeah, I'm positive. Something definitely happened. So we get up, we walk down there, and as we're walking down there, I take the flashlight, and there is no eyeballs at that tree this time. And I'm like, oh, he definitely, either he walked off, he got up. So we walk over to the tree, and it is like a drop off like that. And I'm looking, and I'm kind of like following the blood. And all of a sudden I move over, and he is 3 feet from us, but he's like 4 feet down, and he's just laying there. And I'm like, oh, okay. So we started evaluating. His head was up, but he was doing his head was just going around in circles. And I'm like, we got to back out. We got to give him a little bit more time. He's obviously going to expire here soon. It's not something as a deer hunter that you want to see. It's just, you have a lot of respect for the animals, and that is the one hard part. I'm sure people are going to criticize me. Well, why didn't you call the game warden, or why didn't you call the guy with the dog so he could dispatch him? And it's, at that point, we were that far into the hunt. So, needless to say, the night went on, and we ended up having to expire the deer with our knives. So, but it was just one of those things where you really truly gain a respect for how big mature bucks and their will to live. They're just crazy stout animals for sure. But it was just one of those crazy hunts that, like, how would you ever know? Like, we're talking about things that are just meant to be, that deer would stand there twice after looking at me silhouetted in a tree, that he wasn't going to run off. That deer was just meant to be mine. My thought for
He's a beauty. What did he weigh?
He was 170 clean.
170. What did he score? Did you get him scored?
I did not get him scored.
He's got to be 120 at least, maybe 115, 120.
If not, he might be just a little shy. Yeah. I would guess.
He's a good buck, though. I bet you he's 115. Nice 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a beauty.
Yeah, that one little split G2 there probably, or I don't even know what you'd call that.
Yeah,
the G3, G2 kind of split. Looks like a turkey track.
Yep, it does too. Yep, that's cool. Yeah, it's a wicked story. Now, I wanted to hit on a little bit. You used to take a blind guy deer hunting. Yeah. That's pretty unique. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, so
it's pretty amazing, really.
I still am a bit, but not as much now that we have a 7-month-old. But I was very active in the NWTF. That's how Sam and I met.
Oh, cool.
Was at an NWTF event. So, like, I was very into the whole turkey scene and stuff like that, into habitat work. Well, a girl had brought up the idea to us here in Vermont that she would like to start some type of handicap hunt. And the NWTF has a name for it. They call it the Wheeling Sportsman. And it's a hunt for, like, quadriplegic, people that, don't have the opportunity to go. Actually, one of the gentlemen we had talked about earlier, Dave King, had taken this guy out a couple of times prior. And he came up to me and he goes, hey, I think I got good guy that you could probably take on your hunt, and he'd probably appreciate it. So we got connected, and we started doing all this stuff, and we actually have a filmed deer hunt of him shooting his first deer with a crossbow. It was crazy. So people are like, oh, well, how do you take a blind guy hunting? It's no different than really taking anybody else, but you are... Go ahead.
I'm waiting to hear because I have no idea.
So a lot of times it worked with better if I had a backpack.
Mm-hmm.
He reaches up and holds onto my backpack, and I'm his guide. He just follows, and then he literally just steps. Your pace is very slow just because he's got to be able to step and feel everything too. You make a lot of noise. It is what it is.
Now, is he fully blind? Like, does he see black?
No.
Or is it like he can't see anything?
He cannot see anything, but what's weird is if it's sunny out, bright, it hurts his eyes.
Really?
Right. So, like, he can see that shade, but it's nothing there. No picture. He can't see anything. And he actually has...
Wow.
He has a really rare disease that... I can't remember the exact percentage, but he can't hear either. He's got hearing aids. So he can hear with the hearing aids in, but he takes his hearing aids out, and I mean, it's literally like that senior home guy. Like
blind, deaf.
He really can't hear. So the good part is with the hearing aids in, it definitely helps him out. So usually he hangs on to the backpack, and then you just guide him through the woods. Now for shots, he does everything like we do. But rather than put his head down on the stock, he tips his head away, and you have to look over his shoulder to line him up. Now, what people don't understand, it's a lot more difficult than you would think it is because, like, you or I...
No, I think it's difficult.
I think so.
I think it's very
it's
incredible.
You
it's
don't
like
think
taking
about
a youth out times 10.
Probably. It's a good way,
like
but it is...
almost impossible.
What the most difficult part is we can all cheek weld. Every spot, like when you pull your gun up, you're putting your cheek on the same spot just about. You're probably within centimeters of being in the same spot every time. You're going to be close. With him, you don't know if he's holding the gun just a little bit different or the crossbow just a little bit different or however. And I don't know if my face is hitting the same spot every time on his shoulder. Because normally what I would do is lean my chin in on his shoulder. That way he had contact from me and I could look down and see it. He did everything.
Now, are you telling him left, right, up, down?
Yeah, he does everything.
So you're like, okay, left, down, down.
Oh, yeah.
Squeeze.
Yeah, all of it.
Holy crap.
So we ended up having a great group from a gentleman over in Springfield. He was like, hey, I got a piece of property here. I think we can really make this happen if we put some time in. I had a lot more time this was before I had met Sam. So I was spending all my free time there, and we had got it lined up to where this guy came down and he hunted with us too. And he brought a camera. He's like, man, I think it would be cool to get this on film, just kind of show people how this all works. So we ended up, he killed a turkey with a bow. One of the first weekends that was successful. It wasn't your dream hunt where it just shoots and the bird goes down. I had to chase it a little bit, but needless to say, we got it. And then, one of the following weekends we went out there and it's just meant to be hunts. Like we bumped a deer walking into a spot on this property. There was log roads through it. The guy was like, we got to go. We got to run back the way we came. He goes, we got to set up. He goes, I think I know where that deer is going to come through. So we ran back up. This is when it gets really hard. So we're going as fast as we can back up this log road. We get into a spot.
I can't even imagine.
We throw these blinds up. We get in the blinds. Guy gets up and he's like, okay, I got the camera rolling. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I said, that deer is coming. I said, and she's coming right at us. She comes up and she's walking and she sees the blinds. Like she knows. And I don't know if it triggered curiosity or what, but she kept coming at us. She gets about 25 yards. I range her and I'm like, it's time. His name's Josh. I'm like, Josh, it's time. I'm like, this is now or never. So he's got the crossbow up. He's got it on the shooting stick, and I'm telling him, I'm like, okay, down, right. I'm like, bat. Like, she's standing there looking at us, and I'm like, okay, down, left, right, left, fire. And he squeezed, and he hits her, and she runs off. I knew he hit her fairly good. Mm-hmm. He was good straight up and down. I just wasn't sure height-wise where he was at. So we're celebrating. He was like, I got that all on video. This is like the craziest thing. So sure enough, we go. The other guy had run up the road. He watched the whole thing happen. He was like way up the log road, and he watched the whole thing happen. It's just one of those crazy things that you're like, how would this ever happen? Mm-hmm. And we ended up going, and we found her, and it just was he got so emotional because he at one point did have his eyesight. I think he said right around 21 or 23 years old, he started to lose his eyesight. Oh. And that's when he started like all that stuff. And I can only imagine it's gotta be hard.
So he had it before.
Right.
Oh
yeah. So
that's nightmare.
Yeah. So it's gotta be tough. It is. It's no doubt about it.
And then you got a buck with him, right? Rifle buck?
No. We had another opportunity at a muzzleloader doe.
I thought you got a buck of.
No. So I did have a youth hunter that I hunted with for a couple years that hunted with me in the mountains. Like, I got blessed there because there's not a lot of youths that will stick it out all day long and hunt hard. This kid, I put him through the ringer. I thought for sure after that first year, I was young. I didn't know any better either. I was legal age to take a youth, but I was just doing whatever I could to try to get him a deer. And the first year he saw a deer. The second year he shot at a deer way up in the mountains, and it hit a limb, and it was a miss, but it was exciting for him. He's like, oh man. So, and then the next couple consecutive years after that, he shot 3 bucks. Shot a spike horn youth day, and then on his final youth day, he shot a nice 6-pointer.
Nice.
So,
is he still hunting?
I believe so. He went to the Navy. So
cool.
Once he graduated, he went into the Navy. So I'm not sure if I'm sure once he gets back and
he'll hunt again.
He'll probably start hunting again. So once in a while I hear from him, but he's growing boy. He's got stuff he needs to take care of in his younger ages right now. So.
All right. That's awesome. Oh man, this has been great. It's been a good podcast.
No, we appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll have to get you back on because I know we could go for another probably 3 hours here.
Oh, man.
I mean, we talked for how long before we started?
Oh, yeah, right? Yeah, because we were talking about, like, theories and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, we both had theories, but, yeah, well, for sure.
Yeah, well, we'll have to get you back on because, it's been a good podcast.
Yeah.
So, thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Sam.
We
Thanks,
appreciate
Morgan.
it.
Thanks, Nate.
Yep.
All right. Well, boys, we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.